Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, production designer Marcus Rowland, joins us to talk about his work on Last Night in Soho. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so make yourself comfortable as we jump into the conversation with Marcus. Good evening, Marcus. Thanks for joining me today.
Good evening, Robert. Nice to be with you.
Now I'm happy that you've managed to organise something. You'll be the second crew member I've talked about Last Night in Soho. First one was Jude Farr. So I'm kind of trying to get a nice overview of all the design process of the film. So it's going to be sort of quite excited to come talk about the creator of the world in Last Night in Soho.
Yeah, I mean, I looked on your site and I saw. I mean, I started listening to Jude. I mean, I never listen to myself, and I'm very, you know what I mean. I'm not sure I want to listen to anybody else about work that I've done, to be honest. But it's good that you spoke to her.
No, it's great. I'm just really happy to sort of get two different sort of people from similar perspectives from similar departments as well, especially when it's on a film that's kind of spans over two different time periods, and it's not just focused on modern day, but you do have the 60s element and the sort of, I guess, the thought process of the creative, but also the sort of what they will have to go through to sort of get the images in their mind onto paper and then actually have those sets built or locations found to have them set dressed.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, you know, I mean, I suppose that everybody sort of always thinks that you have a solid idea where you're going from the beginning, which of course you don't. It's very much that, you know, I mean, you start the process, and with Edgar, I know very well. So it's you know, I mean, intrinsically it's easier because you know the person you're dealing with. So the discussions are a bit more probably franker than they would be, and a bit more relaxed than they would be if you didn't know the way they worked and they know how you work. But in terms of Last Night, so, you know, obviously I started by looking for visual reference, which is always my starting point, because that's the fun bit, really, and doing online research or research through photographers I like, and that gives you an into the project. Edgar starts in a completely different way. He starts by finding as much film reference as he possibly can, and they sort of complement each other. With Last Night and So being sort of, I never quite know how to quantify it, sort of obviously horror, thriller, contemporary, and period. It's trying to come at it from all different angles. And I don't think that when we started the process, you know, I mean, obviously you get a sense of what the film is from the script, but I sort of always think that the most enjoyable process of the filmmaking is to be on a journey. And the journey starts with me spending a bit more time with Edgar, and albeit we ended up building quite a lot. We started by scouting quite a lot and wandering around Soho and then various other clubs, you know, I mean, that exist now or existed then, and getting a sense of what Soho was like in present day. And also visiting the Windmill Club and things, you know, yeah, they've completely changed and aren't right for the film, but it just gives you an immersive sort of quality where you actually begin to naturally feel the way you want to take the film. So, you know, we went to the Café de Paris, which I don't think is open at the moment, but went to that when it was open. And obviously that's changed massively since that sort of 1960s version. And that we sort of, you know, I mean, looked at how that might work there briefly, and then realized that we're going to build it most likely. And it's not that we set off with the intention to build all the clubs that we had. It was just that you soon realize they're not going to give you anything visually or practically. It's a bit more like it's exploring and finding out how the film's going to look itself.
When you're exploring these various locations and getting sort of a sense for Soho, do you take visual images for yourself to then sort of start designing from an image, or do you just sort of have slight small references and then start creating this world with a little bit more creative freedom and mold the world differently, so you're not thinking about the time period, so that you could sort of take like the best bits of the 60s and put them in?
I think, inevitably you're not, I would never want to do a job that was slavishly historically accurate. It's not really design. It's not really designing. All you're doing is replicating. Yes, you want to start with the original and have a sense of where that stood. In terms of all the 60s bits, they're still creations. Yes, they're bedded in the sort of stylistic tones of that period and things that people recognize from that time, but we're not slavishly following anything. And the Café de Paris particularly is not slavishly following the Café de Paris. The one we built is in percentage wise is a lot different. There's a few bits from the real that we took from the real location, but most of it is made up, to be honest. And the look of it and the sumptuousness of it, I'm not sure it was ever quite as glamorous as we made it. And we made it bigger, and obviously the mirrors, and so it has the flavor, I think, but never slavishly follows the historical side of it. And we didn't need to, because that's the curious thing about Last Night in Soho. You have a mixture of present day and period, which was the fun bit to do. And obviously you want them to blend together, but you also want them to be completely different, so you always have a sense of where you are. So that's part of the journey that we go on to get that balance. And with Jude, obviously the way it's decorated reflects that period and time as well. But certainly as soon as you go into Mrs. Collins's house, it's sort of timeless in a way. And we're then that's part of the process of her being drawn back into this, what on the surface seems a very glamorous world, but soon disintegrates into something more darker. But, it's very difficult to sort of say what I think, the thing with obviously doing films with Edgar, they come from influences of other films, but it's very difficult to put them in a particular genre, which is what's great about it. I'm not sure where Last Night in Soho fits. I'm not sure. There's a bravery in the choice of filmmaking that Edgar does that, it's all driven by his enjoyment of other films, but it sort of sits alone. It doesn't really sit in any particular format.
I just want to sort of go back to when you're talking about the house being timeless and also the glitz and glamour, because it feels like it's very much the house is a character in terms of, I can imagine if you walk in, it has that weird musky smell as well of sort of slight sort of damp and everything. It's just that sort of smell and how everything's decorated inside. But I guess the production design is a character in itself, as you're whisked into this sort of glitz and the glamour of the 60s. But as you said, the further the film goes on, you get the sort of deeper underbelly and everything. And when you're designing the first intro into the 60s world, because it's probably my favorite set and scene, because you're literally whisked into, you go down this alleyway and then you just see a big Thunderball poster of all those lights, and then you go into the Café de Paris with the mirrors, the chandeliers, the glitz and the glamour. Then you do get a slight scratch on the surface of that underbelly with the guy in the club who says he could be whoever she wants him to be. Where do you begin with the research and wanting to show off all these set pieces to then going into that sort of darker element, and what plays a part in wanting to show these elements in the film?
Well, the good thing about filmmaking is the thing. It's never a single moment, or it's a single person who makes those decisions. It's a progression, and obviously, that whole sequence. Obviously, it was in the script, and then it was storyboarded, so that thrashes out the stylist. Some of the technical side of it and what we're where we're trying to achieve it. And that doesn't come quickly. That's a more discussion how we take her from the bed, Ellie from the bed, down the sort of alleyway to the Café de Paris and then downstairs. So within the script, there was, and Edgar obviously wanted to try and put in some very practical visual tricks within the mirrors and those sort of sequences. So each individual piece takes a little, we break it apart and we try and study how the best way to do it. So in terms of the first mirror at the bottom of the stairs, it's a double set with a sliding mirror that comes in, and then there's some, there's a chunk of there's some twists where it's digital. So throughout, that's all part of the way we laid out the design as well. So that as she comes down the stairs, at one point we were thinking, and it seems like a crazy thought now, that maybe we'd do a double staircase with some glass in between that sort of meant. But the reality is the way we did it was more interesting, and I think that's very successful. But that's part of the design process. We knew where we wanted to get, we just didn't know how to get there. So we sort of experimented a bit with sort of models and tried to work out in 3D as well how those reflections would work and how that would appear. So each of those pieces is a problem in itself. So we'd sort of delve into it, and ideally that sort of comes together in the end result. I think stylistically, it came across in the script that it always wanted to be this incredibly sort of sumptuous and decadent world, and we were sort of always at that point drawn to the sort of burgundies and reds, and some decisions come easy. That seemed to be always there from the beginning. And other ones just take a while to sort of work out the best way and try and find other references and materials. And by drawing it up, you get a sense of how that visually looks. It was a complicated, and I think one of the best things about a lot of the tricks that are in that particular sequence, including the dances, they're complicated tricks that are part practical, part digital, part camera and performance. So, and when they're done seamlessly, and even I can't remember sometimes which bits were which, I could sort of probably analyze it and work it out. Then I think that's very successful. It's not like there's glaringly digital elements. It's a sort of seamless combination of all departments that I think is the most successful part of that. But obviously there's, within the confines of obviously designing it, there's problems you have to overcome. But, probably the tightest thing we were doing there was, as usual, particularly it was a very short period of time because we had all 3 sets on one stage in Leavesden Studios. And so we had to sort of more or less finish all 3, which is the 3 basement clubs. But that was, it's a pleasurable process to be able to see those progress as they go along. But it was tight on time. But I think, and I don't own a play set building, but there's something much more, there's something, if you're familiar with it, and we generally are, and the dressing, there's something much easier about building things than there is about locations, which have a tendency, have all the inherent restrictions and problems that come with them. Whereas if you're building a set and you've got the right crew with you, it's sort of easier. Because once you decide what you want and you can see it progress and you can change it and you can sculpt it to what you want from the scene or what you want from the script, you have to make design decisions. But I think that's always, for me, is fairly easy and intuitive. But when you're filming on location, you've got all the environmental problems that come along with that, your limitations of what you can achieve, and it's about the logistical problems. Studios, building in studios is why it's so good, really. But, in that sequence, we sort of mesh together between the bedroom set, then you go down the corridor, which is partly on stage at that point. And then the tail end of it, obviously, is in the Haymarket, which is probably the riskier part of that whole sequence, because we never, we filmed it on a Sunday, late Sunday, and we had more or less road closure, but not entirely. There was always a one lane open with some kind of traffic control, so they managed the traffic through a particular. So there was only a short period of time that you could actually do that Steadicam shot, walk in the middle of the road, and then turn around. Obviously, that's embellished in the distance with posts, but we dressed the exterior of the theatre and the buildings either side. And as you spin around, you see a cab, sort of cab rank cafe, those green things that you have in London, which covered a phone box. So they were all, with all that, you have to really be very meticulous about the planning of it, because you have such a limited amount of time to get it right. And there's only that one time to get it right. Whereas in the stage, you can see it move on. And, in the same program, in the other fun bit we filmed was, and I still, and it was a fun day, was the section that we did on Bateman Street in the middle of Soho, where Jude dressed the whole shop fronts of redressed out existing sort of contemporary shops to period shops. But we had, we had a very limited time to do that. So it's all, we plan it as much as we possibly can. We've got to remove the graphics and undress the stores. It was fun. It was fun being in Soho. I don't think and people enjoyed the process. The people who passed by seemed to, and it was not as problematic as one would have thought. I think it was, normally people would go, my God, you're crazy. Why are you filming in Soho? But Edgar was determined, obviously, to be truthful to the staging of the film. And I don't think he would have made the film if it had been somewhere else and we'd dressed it to look like Soho. I think the genuine feeling that it's a challenge, but you gather, a reality from the real thing that you wouldn't have, you can always dress things and you can always make them feel visually appealing, but the challenge of filming in Soho was part of the process with Last Night in Soho. It was like, oh, why don't we do it there? Why, I mean, crazy in some respects, because the Toucan Bar, I don't know whether you've ever been there, which is the place, obviously, where she's working, that very little pub off Soho Square, was, we filmed upstairs bit and the downstairs bit we built. But I mean, it is the most ludicrously small pub that you could ever choose to film on. And anybody, would doing it from a perspective of actually production or being sensible, wouldn't ever dream of doing it there. But that was the charm of the script. It's driven by the motivation that was integral to it, that it's a homage to Soho, and giving everybody who certainly isn't familiar with it an insight into, the environment and the real world. And that's what the contemporary part of it does, really. It takes you through the sort of chaos of an average night out in Soho in central London. It's even crazier now at the moment.
Well, I just wanted to go back to what you're talking about, having being on location, having a studio to build a set in. I guess with the studio idea is, if you want to take a wall out somewhere, or you need to sort of use movie magic to make a small room big, you can kind of do that. But if you're on a location, it's just very limited, and there's probably a lot more work to go into getting everything in order for it to look how you want it to look.
I mean, they both have their own style in a way. And yeah, as you say, that you can't, you can go into locations and change them to a certain amount, but you have to run with them in some respects. I suppose as a designer and even as a set decorator, like Jude, the reality is the ultimate challenge and an interest is to start from scratch. But by starting from scratch, actually, you alleviate some of the problems that you might have had in the location. So, and it would appear like a bigger challenge, but actually, because you have more control I think it becomes a little easier. And as long as you've got the financial resources and the time to do it, it becomes a more, I mean, obviously by virtue, it becomes much more satisfying because you have much more control over that world. I'm not sort of saying that I don't like filming on location. I do, because there's some amazing locations out there. But it's about, if I was given the choice at the moment, I may change it that I would quite like to do more building if you could find some stages in London to build in, which is probably the only problem.
As much as I like being on location, I do like just seeing, the sets go up from scaffolding to the full creation. I just don't, there's always something, it just feels like that movie magic's coming alive, and you're seeing something just be created from scratch, and it's just there, and you have a certain set, and you just think like, wow, I can't believe this is what somebody imagined to go onto paper, and then it's all been put together and everything. It's just like, wow, it's incredible.
I mean, as a designer, I mean, obviously that's a great buzz, I mean, and you see it go up, and it's obviously really exciting when people turn up, or nerve-wracking, one or the other, and you see the trend, you see people's reactions, and I pass up, and that is, I mean, fantastic. A part of me always likes being, especially on a bigger set, where you see all the workings of the outside of the set as much, and then you just walk through a door, and then you're in this different environment, really, because the outside, you go from one side to the other, and you're in a place made out of 2x1, and it's very much just a timber shuttering, and then inside you've finished it off. I like looking at, I like the outside of the set almost as, as much as I like the inside, in a way, if it's visually interesting.
There's just so much ways to unpack from design, and especially when a film is based in over two sets of periods. But you mentioned before that there was a mixture of like in-camera tricks, and I guess staging would be, the scenes would have to be blocked in a certain way. But with the idea of like camera tricks, do those sort of things come into consideration when you're designing? Or was that something that comes on later on?
No, I mean, they were always in the fall. And all those particular pieces, we, I mean, obviously steered it to a practical sense. If it was possible to do it practically, we would have done it, everything practically. But obviously, and they were very much the pivotal points of the design that we did focus quite heavily on how to do it and how to achieve it. And part of that process, and I think we sort of did, I mean, we did storyboards and then some very, fairly simple animatics of how that might work, and then try to dig into how to make it the most seamless we possibly could. And the good thing is, and we had, in the end, we fought for quite a bit of rehearsal time. So none of these things are, on last minute in a way, and they sort of can't be. We rehearsed it quite a bit, and from that, we found that maybe you're shooting off the set, so we readjusted that. So it gives you, it's an ongoing process, really, which is part of that design process with Edgar. And there's nothing. Edgar is nothing if not very, very thorough. So that if you're gonna build it, you're gonna shoot it, and ideally we give him more than he'd imagined, but also in terms of the idea is there and it is rehearsed. It's not. We have time to plan it and control it and make it work. The dance with Sandy and Matt, basically. So when they're dancing in the middle of the floor, I mean, that, on the surface, it looks like a very simple switch where Ellie takes over from Sandy, and it is, but it's very heavily choreographed with the steady cam and hitting the right mark at the right time, that they would disappear physically out of that frame and then reappear, manage to switch. And then it's tied it up digitally as well. So it is carefully worked out.
I guess a lot of films these days do rely on that, the sort of visual effects, but once you start seeing the in-camera tricks, and when you do watch the behind the scenes, it's always quite refreshing to see and quite insightful to see how everything's done, what all the moving parts are just for it to work. As you said, something simple like the dance scene where I think it's weird because I think people could try to see where things cut or where they're trying to sort of play tricks. But if they're all in camera, then it's a lot more meticulously planned and thought out for it to sort of look as smooth as possible, which is again a testament into people's craft in creating those sort of moments.
But again, I mean, also, I mean, certainly within the confines of last night. So that was part of the challenge, really, was to do these sort of sleight of hand tricks, and that was always the intention, and try and pull them off as seamlessly and as practically as possible. Not always, fully practical, but that was the intent.
I think it's quite refreshing as well to see those sort of things put into film, but it's what I was curious about as well, because I'm pretty certain my phone was probably listening to me about me talking about Last Night in Soho to one of my friends, that it came up with a color palette breakdown of the film of various scenes. Mm-hmm. And with a film like Last Night in Soho, where would you begin with choosing the color palette? And then would you want to make as much effort to sort of make a difference between the 60s and modern day? Or would you like to sort of try, in certain scenes, try to sort of merge it together? So I think a good example of that is when they go to Infernos and how the sort of colors in that change as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, all those sort of things are constantly juggled, really. And then there is certain decisions which just seem intuitive. Like I think I never imagined at one point, and I don't think Edgar did, that the Cafe de Paris would be anything but red. But then all the other choices are based around a selection that I've sort of decided to try and experiment with a lot of the time. I like the color of I do have a tendency to like green, I have to confess. And but something like the Rialto Club, which is the next stage down, I think it's sort of very successful with its sort of color tones in there. And you've got a different type of green, contrasting sort of pink, which are on the same level. And then the costumes when they're doing the performance is, there's a sort of goldy yellow. And I think those color tones, and then when Chung lit it, he's given it a slightly pink tone as well. So it's trying to play with colors that I'm excited to use, in a way that I've not put them together before. Yes, they follow you follow contrasting colors and things like that. But I do enjoy trying to do different variations on those sort of tones. And then when it descends into the sort of basement club, it's a bit more full on. The lighting's much more acidy, and the design of that particular club is a bit more, less vibrant, but is sort of more chaotic in terms of the pattern and tone. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, to pick out the when they leave the club, it's becoming, that world is seeping more into it, and then in terms of when the shadow men appear in the strobe light, that they're all merging into one, really.
Because I guess as a production designer, you do have a heavy say on what colors are going to be used and to set the tone, and then whatever the DP sort of decides later on with their breakdown and everything. What I'm also curious about, because this is not your first film that you've done with Edgar Wright, whilst you were designing, did you ever, and helping with creating the world, did you ever put little like Easter eggs or inside jokes between yourselves in your designs, or hid stuff from like previous films that you've worked on together?
I don't think there's always stuff buried with anything within the graphics. It's always a bit more denser than it would possibly need to. unless you sort of froze frame on it and things like that. So there is stuff, but we wasn't, because we've done that quite a lot in the past. So, I mean, with other films like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and there is always bits of reference with the Cornetto trilogies. I mean, there's always, I mean, there is other film references and things like that. Last Night in Soho is a little bit different, really. We didn't dwell too much on that. It's a sort of more standalone piece in itself. And there's no doubt that if there's an opportunity to put something in subtly or have a film reference, then it sometimes appears, but I can't think of one that went into, I'm sure. And it's, I mean, it's another thing that's quite interesting. It's interesting when other people find them, but it doesn't mean they're just, and that naturally occurred sometimes.
When you collaborate with people or have those sort of certain in-jokes, it's always nice to sort of try, see if you can notice them or point things out.
Yeah, I mean, there's things about Shaun of the Dead that I've had emails about that sort of was this a deliberate decision. And there are a few, but a lot of the time it was an 8-week shoot. We never had enough money. we were too busy trying to even survive and make the film, didn't really have a lot of time to, it is layered because Acres films are layered, but it wasn't that we had the luxury to stand back and go, I'm going to put this bit, it really wasn't. It was like crazy busy. And we just ran from 1 minute to the next until it was finished.
No fun and games on set. What I've also noticed in my research was you were absolutely butcher this, but the Campari Passion for Film Award, which you received at Venice, which must have been a really sort of amazing sort of feeling to be given such an award when you're working with a director as a close collaborator. How did something like that come about, and what was your sort of feeling about being awarded this?
No, I mean, obviously it's, it's a pleasure and it's a great honor to have the award. It's great to, I welcome even more. But the thing is, it's not, they're never just for you, they're part of the film and it's in the festival. Yeah, they're looking for various, they want to showcase other people's different parts of filmmaking. So other people understand that it's not just centrally, it isn't just one person, it's other crafts and other skills that go into it. I've become, I used to hate the idea of being on camera, or certainly doing public speaking as a terrifying prospect. And initially, when people wanted to do the sort of Q&As, it sort of started where they'd do a Q&A or people ask questions about behind the scenes stuff that they would package up. And so I always used to avoid it, but I sort of taught myself to ignore that and be a little more demonstrative about it. And like we're chatting now, I enjoy it now. It's taken me a while, but I enjoy it. And the whole prospect of having to go up on stage and collect this award is terrifying if you're, and you're used to hiding in the shadows. But it's all part of the fun. And Venice is a fantastic place to be, and it was a fantastic privilege to be. You've got a sense of what the real film, in the luxury part of filmmaking that you never really see on a day-to-day basis. The fantastic hotels, the boats to the venue, and the whole works. It was a great privilege, and it was fantastic to win the award. And the thing that struck me most and I was about to give this, the award weighs a ton, and I don't think it literally, I picked it up and I could barely, it's like a dumbbell. It's made out of solid brass, which shocked me.
Is it one of those things as well, you don't want to put it on above the fireplace just in case it might crack?
You won't want it to fall on you, I can tell you that. No,
but I am honoured that you managed to talk to me, sort of thing, especially now you mentioned you don't like the public speaking, but now you enjoy it. I was feeling like, well, it made me feel a little bit more like really happy that you joined, sort of thing, to talk about it. Because talking about work as well can be very difficult. And then having specific questions. But it's still, congratulations on winning the award. I do have a final question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite story about Soho that you might have encountered or you might have heard from somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite stories are, mainly that the process of filming in Soho was so rewarding in a way, partly because it's the central town, it's very close to where I live, and just the characters that that you met, really. I just I have them, and I was sort of speaking with Edgar the other night, and one of the things that strikes me as a personal memory, and it's always been, is that in the enthusiasm of the project, we started wrecking at 5 a.m, because you can't see Soho for people most of the time. So we did early morning recce's, wandering around, grabbing a coffee. It's that sort of personal experience where we're just going, does this work? Does this street? And it's even though it's not a massive area, but obviously, and we strayed across into Fitzrover and things like that. We just walk around, having a look at everything, taking pictures, just getting into it. And they're the fun bits.
Do you ever feel like, because Soho, well, I guess it is busy, but pre-pandemic is even busier. Did you ever feel like it's slightly haunting walking around when you're so used to seeing people there? Because I remember dropping something off at like 3-4 a.m. there, and it felt like the creepiest place in the world because it was just so quiet.
Yeah, no, and that's sort of what's trying to be captured in those pictures at the end when the titles come up. And they were obviously shot. I think they were probably the first people, apart from a news crew, to shoot those. Still, basically they're moving cameras, but on a tripod we couldn't. And that was just trying to capture that. That was there at 4 a.m, 5 a.m, where you've got this busy place, and then suddenly the life's sort of less. It's not quite bubbling out on the streets. But that whole period a unique period, hopefully, is that, and I was staying in Fitzrover, just off Soho, and literally it was a very surreal experience wandering around empty Soho, which was enjoyable, but it like you say, it's a tiny bit creepy at night to wander around literally everywhere. And Soho particularly was just no one there, because all the bars, restaurants and clubs, and it's not on a thoroughfare, so no one's driving through it for any reason. It's sort of very much closed off now. So that's what those pictures are. Those images at the end were sort of trying to say. Really, it's sort of the interesting but slightly creepy world of Soho.
Yeah, it was. I think it also puts into perspective because I watched the film at London Film Festival with a packed house. So when you're watching it, I think everybody's kind of silent. And even though it's such a fresh image in mind, it's also still a weird one to see and still get your head around just how quiet it was then. Marcus, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. Last Night Soho is still in cinemas, but I'm sure it will hit VOD very shortly for everybody. So please, well, if you already listened to it, then we've kind of spoiled it. So apologies, but
difficult.
Exactly. So I guess there'll be a warning beforehand. But no, thank you again, Marcus, for taking the time to speak to me. Take care, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.